So I wanted to talk about marriage and then more specifically Christian marriage. But first, I wanted to talk about marriage as intended by God in the Bible. What's going on with that? So I had already covered how in Genesis, God makes Adam from the earth, but then instead of making Eve from the earth, he makes Eve out of Adam's side, not his rib, his side. She is made as a counterpart, as angelic assistance, as if from the Lord, to Adam. And so what was once one becomes two. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians in America, you know what, not just America, a lot of Christians, they interpret this as meaning that the woman is below the man and that she is subordinate to him. And the thing is, that is a misinterpretation of what Paul says later, and also not understanding what God is doing in Genesis. So, as I mentioned in the other video, the reason why God takes Eve from Adam's side and not from the ground as the way he made Adam is because in between doing this, he gives Adam dominion over the ground, over the earth, over everything that walks and crawls and flies and swims. Um, he gives Adam dominion. But how can you be in a co equal relationship, a representation of God in his three aspects together as one, if one person is subordinated to another? So, as I've said before in other videos, there's a lot of representational. I hate to use the word magic because it's not that, but it's the anchoring of a spiritual reality in the physical realm, thereby bringing it into the physical realm. And so this two, one into two is a representation of what God himself has done with himself. So, by taking Eve from Adam's side, making her his counterpart, even angelic, as if angelic assistance from the Lord, they are equal, but as if one flesh. And usually when I see Christians talking about this, they're usually talking about it from a this is why you shouldn't have sex with anyone and until you're married and only have sex with the person that you've married. Because everyone you have sex with is someone that you become one flesh with. You're exposing yourself to any sins that they're engaged in, any generational curses. You're creating a soul tie. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is incorrect. But what I am saying is there's actually something I think even more important happening there. And that is that when you are one flesh with somebody, you have equal dominion to speak over them, to come into their life and to make prayers, to speak things over them. This is why who you marry is probably one of the most important things we ever do, because that person has equal authority to pray over you. Now, God always, I love the Lord. He makes it so that an unsafe person, their prayers are hindered. So, for example, it does specifically say that a husband that's mistreating their wives or a husband that's mistreating their wife, their prayers are hindered. Like if you're misusing your power and authority in a situation, God is not really interested in hearing from you. And he does actively turn his face from people who are misusing their power and authority over others. So, what ends up happening is God gave mankind dominion, but in order to be able to protect each other spiritually, to be able to have the authority to pray over a person, to ask for help from the second heaven, from God, from the angelic realm, you have to have standing to make those prayers for them to have like full efficacy. The more removed you are from a person or situation, the less authority you have to speak into that situation, to speak over that person. So for example, children, they are temporarily completely under their parents. And then when they become adults and they move out and then they get married, they are no longer under their parents' dominion. They are stepping into their own dominion. And they are doing that with another person as if we're representing God. Because the other thing too is if you think about it, the God's representation of marriage, there are three people as if one. It's the man, the woman, and God, which mirrors God in his three aspects: Yahweh, Holy Spirit, Jesus. And each person kind of has their own individual um, kind of angle in the relationship. So, by making everyone that you've um, slept with or married to, by making it so that you are now one flesh, there is now created a situation where you have authority, equal authority, to speak over that person and also for them to speak over you. And usually, like, in Eden, this would be used for good, not ill. This would be for someone's benefit and not at their expense. However, obviously, in Christianity, we're dealing with like a fallen world. And so this can be misused. But as I said, God puts a governor on that. Those prayers are hindered by the person who's misusing their position of power and authority. Um, you can pray for, like, you can have standing to pray for anyone who is above you. So if you are underneath somebody, you have authority to pray for them, pray over them in the situation. And if you have someone below you in a hierarchy, you have your own flock, or let's say you have children, let's say you're responsible for people in some way, shape, or form, and they put themselves under your protection, under you in some way, they made themselves a part of your flock, you can pray over them, and in fact should pray over them. So how does this get tricky when it comes to the Christian marriage? Okay, now we got to talk about Paul. So Paul is really interesting to me because this to me is the most clear example of how someone may be accessing the dimension where God is, seeing God, hearing from God, but and passing the information through. It's inspired, but there's still the person behind the information, because God specifically says in his word that man should not be alone. But Paul says something to the effect of like, it's a gift to be it's a gift to be single. But if you struggle with like sin and lust and stuff, you should get married. It's like, okay, buddy. This is a very you specific interpretation of what is happening. But how he presents Christian marriage is the inverse of what's happening in marriage in the fallen world. So in the fallen world, it's either that the woman is the head of it's like matriarchal, woman's the head, or often the man is the head and he's misusing his power over the woman and the people underneath him. And so what back to that representational, not magic, Christian marriage is not a reflection of the biblical ideal that we see in Genesis. It is a reflection of Jesus. Again, we're anchoring a spiritual reality in this physical world through a living ritual, through a living kind of magic. And so what it is okay. The reason why Christians can go before God and be seen as Jesus and be seen as innocent, and also make it into heaven, not on their own merit, but because Christ saved them, is because they've made Christ their head. By making him the head, by putting themselves under his kingship, authority, dominion, by doing what he wants. That's one reason why doing the will of Jesus and doing the will of God is so important. Doing the will of Jesus means you are as if his hands. He is your head and you are doing his work. You are there in a corporate body of many people who altogether are acting as if Jesus on this earth, having made him their head, having subordinated themselves to Jesus. And Jesus is safe to do that with because he's Jesus. He doesn't misuse his power over people, and in fact uses his position of power to serve them. Christian marriage is supposed to replicate this, but people will be doing people things. So, a lot of uninformed and unenlightened, wrong people thinking they're Christians think that this means that the husband has headship over the woman. He's in charge. He makes all the decisions. He's the most important one. And that she has to follow everything that he does because he is the husband. And so we've accidentally recreated the patriarchal thing that the world is doing. How is that different? Where Jesus specifically came to serve. He is a servant leader. He does everything in the other person's best interest. He is not selfish. So they're recreating through legalism, they're recreating what the world often does instead of what the whole representational magic, not magic, of Jesus is. And so if you are not using your position of authority responsibly, if you're not acting with care, if you are not serving the person underneath you, because that's what, like, for example, if you're a parent, that's what good parenting is. You are above your child. You have power and authority over them, but you're using it for their benefit at your own expense. You are sacrificing to make sure that person is having a safe, loving, wonderful experience in this world. Also, you're teaching them like, okay, we don't do these things. Let's do better. So any person who's putting themselves in the position of head, they are not serving their wife. And they are not understanding that she is a counterpart. She's not subordinated to the man by virtue of being a woman. She is as if angelic assistant. But for the purpose of this specific magic, she is acting as if she is the hands of the head. She is acting as if she is the one who's being served. That's why he says, husbands, love your wives as much as you love your own body. It's supposed to be representational of Jesus in his corporate sense. And that's why he says, wives, you have to respect your husbands. Not because husbands don't have to respect their wives, but because the respect in this specific instance is what essentially creates that headship dynamic that's supposed to be replicating Jesus. This is a very specific magical practice, spiritual practice that has a purpose, and it is not the same as what God had intended for mankind in the garden. It's a very specific spiritual practice. So then you see Christians running around basically telling everybody, oh, this is what marriage should be, and like women should be, submissive to their husbands. It's like you have no idea what's happening here. This is supposed to be a representation. And it is acted out as if, but it's not actually true in the sense that, that the husband does actually know what is best, for the wife. We're putting on a little play, y'all. And so, obviously there is the piece of the Christianity that says Christians should submit to each other. So in submitting to each other as equals, these two people have agreed we're going to put on a representation of Jesus so that this spiritual reality is anchored in this world, because we all want to be part of Jesus's corporate body. We put him as our head. That's how we get the inheritance that is for Jesus, because we are part of his body. And by the way to be part of his body is to be doing his will. That said, Jesus never misuses his will. And so any husband who misuses his power, position, authority, and his will, hold on, let me find the exact husband prayers are hindered. Is it 1 Peter 3:7? Wait, no. Bible verse. I should have pulled this up beforehand. Husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. So they're supposed to be honoring the wife. People, this is why I did the Arteezy video. That's why I did the Arteezy video, because I see it all the time. People rules lawyering at each other to make people do something, to force. And from everything that I've seen, God really not a fan of that. He will eventually get around to a judgment piece, but he doesn't force people necessarily. I'm not saying that's off the table, but like as far as I can tell, that's generally not how God likes to work, to go around and make people. And so the fact that we even as Christians have essentially become the Pharisees. There are these rules. If you don't exactly enact these rules, you're a bad Christian. You're a bad Jew. And that's literally the whole point of Jesus, was like pointing to the spirit of the law. Like, you guys are beating each other over the head with the law without understanding what the purpose of all of this is. Christians have ended up doing the same. And so anyway, that's why I love how God's like, "Oh, y'all are acting out of pocket. You know what? I can raise new children who'll follow me as if from these stuff. Like, I can speak to the rocks, and have children." Um anyway, so I hope this makes sense. It's a tricky topic. I will talk to you next time.